Well, hello, everybody. This is Krishna Vidula, representing IFES, GEDC, and IUC, as well as Petrus Communications. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, different parts of the world. We have another outstanding webinar for you today. And in order to take this forward, all I'm going to do is introduce the host, Jennifer Bradford. She is the Business Strategy Manager, Siemens Digital Industries Software, and Global Academic Partner Program for Engineering Education. So over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Krishna. Really excited to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. So as most of you know, since 2017, the GEDC Industry Forum has brought together leaders in engineering and technology from the private sector, education, other stakeholder organizations to really develop the engineering leaders, experts, and innovators of tomorrow. So in coming out of these last couple of years, we're building on these exchanges with a really innovative combination of webinars and small group seminars like this one today to explore some of the key ideas that have emerged in greater depth with our global stakeholder audience. These conversations will culminate in a dedicated in-person workshop and networking event alongside the 2022 WEEF GEDC conference in Cape Town, South Africa from 28 November to 1st December 2022. Our mission is to enable university industry collaboration to address the significant global challenges well identified by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Each event in the series is designed to accomplish that mission, drawing on 4 clearly identified and relevant themes to do so. The themes below reflect the recurring challenges and ideas that have emerged from our events over the last 5 years. They are skills and talent, educational transformation, impact, and innovation and partnerships. Each conversation will bring regional perspectives from across industry, startups, education, and statewide. The format is specifically designed to enable our community to flourish through the sharing of powerful ideas that result in inspired action. So I've got a couple of incredible stakeholder speakers here with me today. But we've got a poll to get a pulse on who is with us today and how to structure our conversation. So Krishna, if you could put the poll up and we'll get a sense of who's with us.
Okay, I will do that. It's going to be launched in just a bit. And so it's launched. It says, which stakeholder group do you belong to? Academia, industry, NGO, government, and partner organization. Go for it.
I see it. Perfect. And while you guys are answering your poll, I am going to introduce the colleagues here with me today. So first of all, I've got Michael Fung, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for the Future of Education at Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico. Michael leads the university's efforts to generate, transfer, and disseminate applicable knowledge about educational innovation, connecting and seeking disruptive global solutions for the future of higher education and lifelong learning. He was formerly Deputy Chief Executive at Skills Future Singapore, where he led the development of a comprehensive education and training ecosystem under the National Skills Future movement, which has become a global benchmark and reference for workforce skills development and lifelong learning. He's founding president of the Higher Education Planning in Asia Association, an adjunct senior fellow at Singapore University of Technology and Design, and serves on various global boards and committees. He is an alumnus of the University of South Carolina and Carnegie Mellon University in the US and Tsinghua University in China. I've also got Cynthia Proctor, who's the Director of Communications and Academic Policy Development for the Office of the Provost, State University of New York in the USA. With SUNY for over 20 years, Cynthia Proctor develops and supports the implementation of SUNY academic policy applicable to all 64 campuses, designed to advance the priorities of the SUNY trustees, chancellor, and provost, positioning SUNY as a national exemplar. This work includes advancement of SUNY's groundbreaking micro-credential policy, adopted in 2018. Key to the success of that policy has been a SUNY-specific definition for micro-credentials that requires review via established faculty governance processes, learning outcomes, assessments, and institutional endorsement to ensure the highest quality. Ms. Proctor holds a master's degree in strategic public relations from George Washington University and a bachelor's degree in public relations and journalism from Utica College. So welcome guests. Thank you so much for being here with us today. How are the results from our poll?
I will share them for you. Just a minute. Predominantly academia, 81%, industry 10%, NGO 6%, and partner organization 3%.
All right, look at that. So heavily weighted toward academia, but industry, NGO making a good showing. We've got a pretty varied audience today. So I think maybe we will jump right in, and Michael, I'll hand it off to you to tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for the introduction. So as Jennifer had shared with the audience, in my career, I've held a number of senior positions across government agencies in Singapore. So I'm going to share some views from a policy-making perspective. But I've also been involved with higher education institutions, and so my comments would also take on an institutional perspective. Jennifer, you mentioned about the Skills Future movement, which I led for the last 6 years before coming to Mexico to Tec de Monterrey. And through the Skills Future movement, we've built a comprehensive national continuing education and training system. But that builds upon 4 decades of efforts in workforce skills development in Singapore. In relation to the topic today for the webinar, we've also developed a micro-credential system. We call it the Workforce Skills Qualification System. And under that system, there are a number of mechanisms that allows for micro-credentialing. The most important one is the statements of attainment under the Workforce Skills Qualification System. I'll just call it WSQ. And training providers would issue credentials to learners that have completed the course and is certified to be competent in a particular area.
I think we've lost Michael's audio. I'm not.
In the recent years is a shift towards, with the higher education institutions, a shift towards participating more aggressively in this space. Since maybe about 5 years ago, we've moved the universities, the polytechnics, and the Institute for Technical Education to offer more continuing education courses to the general workforce and general population. This represents a new market for higher education institutions, and although universities have had extensions, have had executive education for years, here we're talking about a much wider expansion of the range of offerings, catering to different types of skills and different types of learners. Today, about 1/3 of the market share for workforce skills development is taken up by the higher education institutions that I just mentioned. And some of the higher education institutions are also moving towards a competency-based curriculum design for the regular offerings to the regular students. And as part of the efforts to incorporate micro-credentials within their curriculum design, and incorporating some of the best-in-class offerings through Coursera, through edX, and so on, into the curriculum. One example would be the Nanyang Technological University. They have explicitly stated criteria for inclusion of micro-credentials within their curriculum. We've also started moving towards recognizing industry skills-based credentials and working that into the overall skills development landscape in Singapore. Let me just share, for a few minutes, the efforts that we're undertaking in Mexico at Tec de Monterrey specifically. So with the institute that I'm with right now, at the Institute for the Future Education, we're championing a future for higher education and lifelong learning through research, through education, and through outreach. And 2 key themes that the Institute is championing is to ensure that the future education and lifelong learning will be accessible and responsive. Accessible to all learners, beyond traditional students to lifelong learners, including the workforce, and to be responsive to the changing skills needs of industries and societies. And here we're seeing more, again, acceleration of offerings towards micro and alternative credentials in this space. So we're offering a range of Coursera and edX courses. In addition to that, boot camps with very specific target groups in areas such as data analytics and coding. The university proper, the university itself, has moved towards a competency-based, challenge-based education model. We call it the Tech 21 model. And that is a key enabler to recognize and incorporate alternative credentials within our curriculum. That entailed a review and shift in our academic policies and regulations, and to align the concept of credit hours and course duration to enable schools to offer and recognize alternative credentials within the courses. In the engineering space specifically, I think we're seeing increasing use of digital and automation approaches towards manufacturing, towards sensorizing factory lines, towards analyzing yields, using data analytics and AI for real-time monitoring and failure analysis and so on. But I think there's a need to embed new skills into the engineering curriculum. And here we run up against accreditation standards, but I think we have to take a complementary rather than a replacement mindset and approach, and to look at how to offer bite-sized learning alongside the accreditation requirements. And I see an opportunity to create new pathways for learning within the engineering space. In the Singapore context, as one final example, we've created a new pathway for technologists and technicians through the Chartered Engineering Technologists and Technicians Accreditation Board, recognizing prior learning of learners and working with relevant sector agencies, industry associations to define the standards and be able to certify these learners with the competencies to be awarded the Chartered Engineering Technologists and Technician certificates. So I'll just stop there as an intro, and we can go on to more questions and discussions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That is fascinating. I have a couple of questions I'm looking forward to coming back to, but I'm very excited to hear from Cynthia and hear what's going on at SUNY. You guys have a really, really innovative approach to micro-credentials, so maybe tell us a bit about that.
Sure, and I don't know if we can get the slides started as well. Oh, terrific, fantastic. So I'm so pleased to join you today. Thank you, Jennifer, for asking me to participate. I'm thrilled. I want to just share a little bit about SUNY because I think it sets some important context for our work. SUNY is the largest comprehensive system of public higher education in the United States. We have 64 campuses that range from community colleges, technology colleges, comprehensive colleges, and doctoral degree granting institutions. And that includes, you know, R1 research universities, medical universities, specialized colleges. So, you know, we often think about SUNY as sort of a microcosm of higher education in the United States generally, because we have this every range of institutional type, large and small institutions, urban and rural. We're fortunate in that, unlike some other systems of higher education, we have one central board of trustees who has oversight over the academic programs at all institutions. So when you think about implementing change at a system the size of SUNY, we turn to trustee policy. So you can go ahead and advance the next slide. SUNY was one of the first university systems in the country to develop a micro-credential policy in 2018 that applied to all campuses. Just to give you a sense of the scope, what you see at bottom right is a map of New York State. The campus names in hot pink are the ones that offer micro-credentials. So today we have 451 micro-credentials in over 60 disciplinary areas across 31 of our campuses. You can see we have some gaps in the North Country and the far western portion of the state. The majority of our micro-credentials are for credit, and they stack to certificates or degrees. The credits of the micro-credential can be applied to meeting degree requirements. We have micro-credentials today that stack to the associate, bachelor's, master's, PhD, PharmD, DDS, OD, and MD. So we cover the gamut. You can go ahead to the next slide. So people often ask me, yeah, okay, so what does this look like, right? So SUNY faculty were very intent on ensuring quality and making sure that our micro-credential program would have the same quality as our degree and certificate programs. So some of the things that we do that maybe are a little bit different, all of our micro-credentials are taught by faculty. Just generally speaking, they're smaller than certificates or degrees. They can be completed in months, not years. They provide in-demand skills, and they provide pathways to continuing credentials. You can go to the next slide. What stands out about our policy are the factors that I've identified here. So when we talk about quality, all micro-credentials, credit and non-credit, go through a faculty governance process. They are not recognition of participation. They're not recognition of community building. Not that those are bad things, they're just not micro-credentials, right? They all have learning outcomes, assessments, and they produce examples of student work. We're developed in partnership with business and industry, aligned to business and industry standards. We have micro-credentials that might be 2 classes and an internship, 3 classes and preparation for an industry certification. We also have some non-credit micro-credentials that have been evaluated by faculty, so they too stack to the degree. Our goal and what we hope that really is the hallmark of our program is that we want a SUNY micro-credential to provide immediate career-ready skills. You can take a SUNY micro-credential and get an entry-level position. You can take a more advanced micro-credential and it'll provide professional development to get a promotion, to shift into a new field. And importantly, at the same time, we also want micro-credentials to be pathways. So in addition to providing that workplace value, they will put the earner on the road to other micro-credentials, certificates, an initial or an advanced degree. Of course, we want our micro-credentials to be portable, they're transcripted on a digital badge. Another unique thing that we do is every micro-credential earner earns a SUNY Global ID, which means they have access to the library and tutoring and student support services. Sometimes in this space, those access to those resources can be limited. So we did make that a priority. And our policy intentionally envisioned micro-credentials for multiple audiences. So we wanted to ensure that we could use micro-credentials to motivate existing students, to give them complementary skill sets to help them stand out. We have micro-credentials for SUNY employees and alumni for professional development. Really partnered closely with business and industry to help them develop a pipeline of new workers, also to upskill existing employees. I think probably one of the most meaningful things that's come out of this program is our work with adult learners, those who are unemployed or underemployed. Really giving them the opportunity to start with something small. I mentioned, 3 courses. For some adult learners who've been out of school for 30 years, who maybe didn't think they would ever go to college, even the thought of committing to a 1-year certificate program is overwhelming. But once we start them with something small like a micro-credential, They get to know higher education, they get to know SUNY, they build their confidence, and we're seeing time and time again these students enrolling in the degree program. You can go ahead to the next slide. I wanted to just talk briefly about micro-credentials in engineering. This is my second micro-credentials in engineering presentation that I've done in the last couple of weeks. One was to the first was to the International Association of Continuing Education for Engineers. So, you know, we have engineering across the board at SUNY. We have transfer pathways because, again, we scale from community colleges through research in every type of engineering you can imagine: aerospace, civil, industrial, electrical, environmental, the list goes on. So we do have some, you know, engineering designated micro-credentials, right? And I've showed an example of them here. But of course, we're finding that engineers are taking micro-credentials in everything from, you know, management and leadership to Python, you know, all sorts of micro-credentials. And again, we have them across 60 disciplinary areas. But I was thinking, you know, and I should say, you know, our institutions can provide the required professional development hours for New York State. And I think, you know, some of the ways that I would love to see us take micro-credentials for engineering are to think about, you know, training for new lines of business. You know, do you need your young engineers to be prepared to, you know, make better proposals, better presentations? Do you need them skilled in, you know, the latest digital approaches? Do you want to have folks who are skilled in providing legal testimony, right? Whatever it is that we can do. And I also think that we could work with engineering firms and organizations to customize micro-credentials. I love the idea of equitable pathways, thinking about some of the micro-credentials that we offer at the community college level, and particularly targeting underrepresented minority students, low-income students. How can we build a pipeline through micro-credentials to move folks who may not consider engineering or STEM fields generally through the process and get them up and working at your organizations? And that's it.
Thank you, Cynthia. Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. I have a million ideas to talk to you about too. So you both talked a bit about developing skills for employment and really building that employment pipeline. So from each of you, I would love to hear what it looks like to bring those employers on board. What do those conversations look like? What is the approach? Do you see employers coming to you seeking new programs, or is this kind of a process of, you know, sort of selling your micro-credentialing system? How is that working for you guys?
Sure, I'm happy to start. You know, we started doing this a couple of years ago. So first there was just an education piece, making sure people knew what this was. And we did that by approaching first the Business Council of New York State, which includes all of our local chambers of commerce, right? We talked to our regional economic development councils. Some of the board members are, you know, business leaders in the various communities across the state, our local workforce investment boards. So really just trying to get folks aware of what micro-credentials were and how we thought SUNY's program was unique. And then we've done different things for different organizations, and it's funny, every company is different, of course, right? So some, you know, wanted to be part of a roundtable, you know, to hammer out ideas, right? Some wanted to have one-on-one conversations with faculty. Some wanted to just, you know, send us a list of things that, you know, are frustrating to them. And, you know, is there a micro-credential that can alleviate frustrations, right? So we've determined that being flexible and available and just being clear in our communication has been essential to working with business and industry. And I'm so honored to say that we were recognized by the Business Council with their first ever Workforce Innovation Award for SUNY's micro-credential program. And that was really meaningful because it meant that we were really making those connections that we've been really striving for. So that was, you know, fantastic.
Congratulations, that's incredible. Michael, I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. It's great work that you're doing at SUNY. You know, we've done some similar work at Tech de Monterey with engaging with industry. Part of our, as part of the challenge-based model that we have moved towards, we have engaged with more than 700 industry partners to bring specific industry problems into the classrooms and to map those to our competency-based education. So in working on these problems, what kind of competencies are being acquired, and then be able to recognize the competencies that are achieved by our students. So I think that industry engagement is critical to understand what the needs are and to make sure that our curriculum design is fit for purpose, and our graduates go on and are able to be employable in the labor market. As I reflect about my experience in Singapore, we had extensive consultation with the industry, with associations, industry bodies in developing the skills frameworks. And the skills frameworks are a description of the various types of jobs, job families and jobs within the sector. And for each job, we would define the technical skills, the soft skills, and the emerging and future skills that would impact that job role. And so you can imagine that's a fairly massive document. But we did that from a public sector perspective, a government-led perspective, to define those skills frameworks. And there, the engagement of employers was critical to make sure that we were aligned with what the industry needs are and what their views would be. We've also undertaken efforts to inculcate a mindset amongst employers to invest in upskilling of the employees, to support the upskilling efforts of employees, so that they remain relevant, the skills remain relevant to the shifting dynamics of the industries. And I think that's quite important because employers play a big role in supporting workforce skills development and getting that message home, including to not just large companies, but also small, medium enterprises. I think that was a key part of the efforts as well.
So that really kind of leads into my next question. In the more traditional education model, you have a fairly limited number of stakeholders. You have the students who would like to get a degree and the educators who are teaching. In more recent times, you might have a little bit of parent involvement in that process, but you're not thinking of a big stakeholder. You know what I'm talking about. You're not talking about a big stakeholder ecosystem though. And with micro-credentials, that is really, really different as you're trying to reach underserved populations, as you're trying to ensure workforce development, as you're trying to really upskill and reskill workers. You have a whole lot of stakeholders suddenly involved in this education process that was once a very linear thing and now has a lot of recursion built in. So talk about how you manage those stakeholder expectations and that whole stakeholder ecosystem, if you would.
Sure. I think that's a really good lens through which to view higher education, but I will argue with it just a bit. So historically, right, when we develop new programs, we have to have input from industry, right? You want to go to the experts and get their input in developing the programs. We have external reviews of academic programs, and then once a program is up and running, I would say 97% of our academic programs have industry advisory boards, right? Now, obviously, some of them are more active than others, but this concept of connecting business and industry is not entirely new to the university setting. What I do think is different about micro-credentials, the magic of micro-credentials, is now we can offer something that's a little bit shorter, a little bit more targeted, and a little bit more flexible. It's not that it's drastically different from what we've done before, but the delivery is different. The intent to connect smaller pieces of curriculum to individual or broader industry needs has really just resonated. And I think that one of the really interesting things is that we've been doing continuing education with employers for decades, right? But now when we say to them, you know, we can do this through micro-credentials, your employees will get academic credit, right? They're now able to say, as an employee benefit, you know, hey, you do have to take this training, I'm going to support it, and I'm going to put you on a pathway to, you know, a certificate, initial, advanced degree, whatever it is. And for employers, that was like an aha moment, right? This is the hiring space is so competitive right now that I've had people say to me that they're putting SUNY micro-credentials, listing it as an employee benefit, right? So it's this new sort of frame that we've been able to offer business and industry that I think allows for closer and sometimes deeper, I think, connection with industry.
That's really excellent. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I think Cynthia, you talked about sort of employers being a major stakeholder, and that's absolutely true. I think the other two big stakeholder groups here it's our concept of students and learners. When I think about a traditional institutions, we think about our standard, you know, first qualification seeker coming through, you know, maybe high school and coming into post-secondary education and trying to get some kind of certification. And we've learned to do that quite well through a series of, through a set of tertiary institutions, community colleges, four-year degree colleges, and so on. But here, I think what we are looking at is a much more diverse range of learners. It could be, you know, somebody has been in the same job for the last 30 years. It could be a young person coming into the workforce and needing to pick up some leading edge digital skills, or even, you know, the more senior segment of our population wanting to learn about how to use smartphones and do online transactions. So we think about the lifelong learning space is extremely diverse. And that's where I think we are challenged as institutions. But that's also an opportunity to extend the concept of education, lifelong learning, and to make it relevant to a much wider segment of the population. And so I think of students and learners as a major stakeholder groups, understanding what their needs are and finding ways to deliver to them in a way that makes sense from the context. And here, I think the space, the opportunity is for tertiary institutions, but also private, you know, training organizations to have a system of micro-credentials that allow for stackability towards some larger qualifications. And that would really create a supportive system for lifelong learning, where individual can continue progress throughout life, learning different things through different pathways, and going from a front-loaded model that we are very much in that space for education today to a much more lifelong learning model. So I see students and learners as a big stakeholder as well, stakeholder group.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Michael. I would just add, I had an opportunity through our Department of Labor to address a group of folks on a listserv about you know, new job openings in the state. And so I wasn't exactly sure who the audience would be. And it ended up being the full gamut of folks who were unemployed, underemployed, employed for quite some time, and needing a change, especially post-pandemic, right? They wanted something where they could have a better work-life balance, or they just wanted something that they loved to do, right? And so we started talking about the different ways that micro-credentials could be used across the learner experience. And the feedback was phenomenal. It was like, wait a minute, one of the comments in the chat was, where has this been all my life, right? So this is, I think, Michael, you're absolutely right. This does provide us with a way to reach out to learners at every stage of their progression, post-retirement and beyond. I mean, one of the attendees was retiring, and he's like, I'm retiring. He's like, but I'm not ready to stop working. Are my skills transferable? Could I use them to do something new, right? Maybe supplemented with some micro-credential training. So very, very exciting space, I have to say.
Yeah, and and you're absolutely right. I think that there are segments of learners that really could benefit from quality education offerings, not in the traditional form, but in micro forms and other forms. And I think SUNY is doing a great job in this space. In many institutions that I've interacted with, they are not well prepared to cater to non-traditional learners. And as I think about what institutions need to do, first is to take the curriculum design and modularize it. Take out components and chunks that are relevant to different learner groups and offer it and deliver it in a different way. And we've talked about being responsive to industry skills needs, so engaging with companies, understanding what the needs are on an ongoing basis. That's very important. And as we have just discussed, how do we deliver to non-traditional learners? Some with high literacy, some with lower literacy, some with time that they can take time off in the evenings. Some have to do it late nights, weekends. So we have to find flexible ways to deliver to these learners. And then the credentialing system that Cynthia you mentioned is very important, and you've developed the credentialing system in SUNY. Kudos to the university system, and that entails really shifting how we think about academic and administrative governance within institutions to be able to support such flexible ways of delivery of learning.
So that's a really good segue to the next question I'd like to talk about. Cynthia, you brought up in your presentation specifically that DEI piece, the reaching those folks who haven't always had a lot of access to traditional education, folks who, for whatever reason, Michael, to your point, may need to take their classes on evenings, on weekends, around childcare duties and their 2 or 3 jobs that they may have. So how are micro-credentials really paving the way for greater access, greater inclusion, greater diversity of our students? What does that look like in both of your institutions, and what do you think broadly the implications are there?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't think there's any magic answer. It's something we continue to work at every day. I think one component of this is addressing sort of the fear, the confidence level, right? When I talk to potential adult learners, and I'm talking about micro-credentials wherever I go. If I'm in the hair salon, the nail salon, I'm like, this is it. There's this, hesitation, college is not for me, just not going to do this. But when we start to talk about just getting them to try something small, we've found just much greater access to adults who are unemployed or underemployed. Giving them and assuring them that we have supports built in, right? Everything from looking at transportation to food insecurity to mental health to remediation, right? Whatever, we can bring the resources of the university to bear here. We're part of some national efforts, the REACH grant, to try to bring in more underrepresented minority students. And we're doing that by making the case for these pathways that you can start small, build, and get degrees. I have this great slide that talks about, a series of micro-credentials at one of our campuses, Mohawk Valley Community College. They're on drones. And, you know, you can start and stop at any place, right? Take one and you can get a job as X. You take another, you can get a job as X and X. You take a third, you get a job as X, 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 X. And then, you know, you take some general education, an internship, and you have your degree, right? So being able to explain those pathways and leverage them for communities who have traditionally been underserved, who may just not think that we could provide that type of education and support to get them jobs to help them succeed.
Yeah, I want to amplify Cynthia's point about building confidence. I think that's critical, and we've seen that over and over again in the in the Singapore context. We were reaching out to the various segments of the population, some of whom are not digitally savvy, some of whom do not see themselves as learners, and they don't think they can actually learn. So we introduced a national program. We call it Skills Future Credits. It's like an individual training account, and we put $500 into that training account, and we tell every Singapore citizen you can use that money for any kind of learning that you want within a set of 20,000 approved courses, which range from like 1 day course to full qualification courses. But what that really did was it started the population thinking about, what do I want to do with this money? It's not cash. You can't take it out as cash. It's in a training account. You can use it for training. So even learners or individuals who did not see themselves as learners, they start thinking, what can I learn? And so some of them used it for baking courses. Some of them used it for how to use smartphones, tablets. Some of them use it for flower arrangements. We used to joke about it, right? What's the economic return on attending a course in baking and flower arrangement? But it did an amazing thing in terms of mindset. It started building the mindset that, oh, I can pick up something new. And if I can learn baking, then maybe I can learn about some, using smart devices, and maybe then I can start learning a little bit more about, the digital world. So I think that was very powerful in terms of a mindset shift. But in terms of catering to or helping the underserved and vulnerable segments, we provided elevated levels of subsidies for course fees. And some of the course fee levels, subsidies were as high as 90%, 95% of the course fees, to help these groups get into a supported system of lifelong learning. But more specifically about engineering, I want to talk about the STEM education in general. STEM education for some time now has been fairly much tilted towards male students, male learners. And we need to look at how to make STEM education more inclusive and pervasive across multiple disciplines. And one could argue that STEM knowledge and STEM competencies is key to solving many challenges that we face in the world today. So one of the research groups that we form under the Institute for the Future Education is specifically focused on STEM education. And we call it socially oriented interdisciplinary education for STEM, to see how we can infuse these concepts and knowledge across various academic and professional disciplines, with specific focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So some of the interesting projects that have come up from that research group includes developing a framework we call Education 4.0 framework, to look at how to infuse these skills in engineering, including creativity skills, design thinking skills, and so on. But also look at STEM education as a tool for social transformation, and to use technology in a way to adapt the education program to be able to reach out to these various segments of the student population. So that's one effort, but I think a lot more needs to be done in this space, especially for engineering.
I love this. Go ahead, Cynthia.
I just wanted to say one other thing that, I think has ebbed and flowed across higher education in terms of how good we are at it, but something that we're committed to really investing in more is also giving folks credit for what they already know, right? So their work and life experience, you know, credit for prior learning assessment, whatever you want to call it. But that too is a confidence booster, right? When you can say to someone, you know, actually, you have already amassed knowledge and experience and skills that you should be getting credit for. And so that is another key way I think that we're going to reach these populations. And when we do that, and as Michael said, if we can think about then pathways to move folks through to STEM education, right, to bridge and leverage what they already know, that's going to be another valuable piece of our work in this area.
Yeah, that's such a huge piece of it, that prior learning piece combined with very relevant skills. So they're seeing that, you know, sort of result very quickly. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to switch gears and take some questions. We've got some in the chat here, and I'm going to play favorites a little bit because the question that was really on my mind is the first one that came up in the chat. So, you know, I loaded this conversation a little bit by inviting both of you who are from institutions. You're from universities. The micro-credential environment in which you work is a university-based micro-credential, but there's a whole huge other aspect to micro-credentials here. And those are things that are happening on the Coursera's of the world, the massive open online courses, but also that are happening in industry. Google has a whole series of certifications out there. Microsoft has a whole series of certifications. Cisco really kind of kicked that off 25 years ago, 20 years ago with their certifications. So how really are we marrying this space where universities are kind of embracing this smaller bite-sized learning, these micro-credentials, but industry has been doing this now for a minute, right? So how are universities able to really collaborate in that space with what industry is doing in micro-credentials, and how do we build some learner confidence? Because there are, I mean, that number gets thrown around all the time that there are over 1 million micro-credentials out there in the world, some of them university-based, some of them industry-based, some of them, you know, kind of private third-party based. What does that whole ecosystem look like?
I'll just say that it is a big ecosystem. And I think one of the challenges, unfortunately, that comes out of that for a prospective learner is what's the right one for me, right? And what's going to be the right fit. So, you know, there's a difference between enrolling in a credential type program and completing it. And so I think from a university perspective, there are some things that we're trying to do. So working with industry and an industry certification, but thinking, okay, what can we bundle around that so that the student has more opportunities? If an industry is offering its own certification that's usually on their own platforms, their own tools, their own experience, you know, their own set system, but to give a student more opportunities, can we give them sort of the foundational knowledge that would apply across platforms, right? So that's one thing. I think there are lots of opportunities to do that. We're seeing a lot more micro-credentials that include industry certifications. To me, that's really exciting, right? Because the student gets, you know, more bang for their buck, so to speak. And then I think, you know, the other issue is I think, I hope that there is some thought about really looking at the outcomes of the training, and then and really trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. You know, I credit IBM, for example. You know, they wanted to open up more positions to folks who didn't have higher education, and they did a fantastic job. But they too realized that once they got folks on board, they needed more, right? So they're looking at developing apprenticeship programs and partnering with academic institutions in some cases for the educational component of the apprenticeship, right? So I think we're still learning in this space, and I don't want it to become a cautionary tale, right? I want us to be careful and look at outcomes and look at how we can best serve learners.
Yeah, and if I take a step back and think about where does industry play the best in terms of roles, and where do institutions play the best, I think it's a complementary approach. Indeed, the Google's, Microsoft, Cisco systems have built extensive certification offerings. Some parts of it is it's self-serving, right? Because you need a lot of Cisco engineers to be able to grow that market share, and if there's not enough training out there in the market, then that becomes a limit to growth. And so it makes a lot of sense for these companies to have academies and certify learners in that space. And I think that will continue to be the case. We do expect private companies, industry, to continue to innovate and be leaders in that space. So, Google, for example, some of the cutting edge knowledge in AI, it's being developed in Google and Microsoft, not in the institutions. So we have to continue to expect that trend. The downside of sort of industry-led certification is it tends to be vendor-centric and platform-centric. And again, that's a natural inclination. So here I think there is a space for collaboration. We can put some of the best in-class knowledge coming from industry and tie that with universities that can serve as a neutral platform, a trusted platform, where education and training is the core business, and the university can then provide recognition for those forms of learning. That's the partnership that we try to foster in the Skills Future movement, with all these leading companies bringing their knowledge, industry relevant knowledge, and working with the universities to provide fairly neutral and open offerings. I say fairly neutral because there's always a bit of a vendor bias to the general learner. So for instance, we have Google coming in to offer digital marketing courses, and it's not just on the Google platform, but of course Google is a big provider of search engine optimization offerings and so on. And then we have Microsoft coming in to look at cloud computing, but again, it's a neutral course about cloud computing, some of which uses Microsoft platform, and some other examples uses other platforms. So I think there's a good partnership that we can have with industry in these areas, and to best serve learners, as Cynthia mentioned.
So I love this picture that's emerging where industry is really kind of contributing the skills component to that. Cynthia, you mentioned building these certifications into your micro-credentials, and the university is still kind of that purveyor of knowledge. And so you get this great blend of skills and knowledge. The piece that I still have a question about, and in fact has come up a couple of times here in the question bank from the audience, where does the experiential part of that come in? One of the things that we as industry hear, for example, we hear from our commercial customers all the time at Siemens, we need folks who have had some real experiential project-based learning. This is why the student competition teams, the Formula student is so valuable and such a great experience. So we've got the skills piece coming from industry, we've got the knowledge piece coming from traditional institutions. Where does that experiential piece fit in the micro-credentialing cosmos?
You're right. I mean, there's no substitute for having that valid work experience. And so I think it comes in a couple of different ways. So for the non-matriculated student who's just coming to take a micro-credential for the first time, we actually have built-in internships to a number of our micro-credentials, right? So even though they're still taking this short piece, they do get an internship experience. We're also looking very closely at apprenticeships and building in credit-bearing micro-credentials into apprenticeships so that the completer gets their journey workers certification, they also amass credits toward a degree. So giving them more opportunities while they're getting that work experience, because I do think that it's so important. And then for our existing students, you know, the idea of taking micro-credentials while enrolled has led to them being able to get better part-time jobs, better internships in their field, right? Because they've been able to demonstrate sooner that they have amassed these practical skills. And, you know, that's a win-win for everybody.
I love that. We are just about at time. Michael, do you have any last comments about that experiential piece?
Yes, in a number of programs that were designed and the skills future offerings, a good portion of it is work-based, and we also have very specific work study programs that we designed where half the time, half of the time students spend that time at the workplace and in company, and then half the time it's in the classroom. And I think that gives that nice balance of the theory and academic knowledge with the hands-on and real-life experience at the companies. And these are specific programs that we offer in collaboration with a set of employers. But in addition to that, we've also set up a range of training facilities that have extensive involvement of the industry. So for example, there are advanced manufacturing training centers set up with Siemens in Singapore, where the equipment is brought in, real life examples of how the factory line is configured and monitored. The students can actually get access to these equipment and see it in action and tweak the sensors, tweak the reports coming out from the engineer, the monitoring system, and so on. So I think those are all very good ways of getting work-based, real-world experience to learners to prepare them for the actual work environment.
Okay, is that it?
Yeah, just thanks so much to Monica at Petrus, especially for compiling all of the research for this. We'll put a link to those in the follow-up email alongside the link to a very short feedback form. Please do share your comments. Look out for a great interview with our partner on this event, Coursera, and more insight into how to implement some of the things we've talked about today. And don't miss the rest of our 2022 series, which culminates with a live event alongside WEEF in South Africa later this year. Finally, thank you, Krishna. Thanks, IFES, GEDC, and IUCED.
Thank you, Jennifer and Cynthia and Michael. What a fascinating discussion. I learned so much in the last 1 hour. I will defer to Hans now to finish up and wind up. Come on in, Hans.
I just want to echo your comments, Krishna. This has been one of the most creative, thoughtful presentations in our webinar series. And Jen, thank you for facilitating this. And of course, I very much appreciate our dear friends of Petrus Communication and I thank you, Jennifer, for mentioning also the comment that contributed to that. Let me just shift again, just very, very inspiring. I've learned a lot and I've taken copious notes, and we've recorded this and we'll share it with our global community. Just want you to know that and give it visibility, what you have just shared. Let me just shift a little bit, because we have many representatives of our IFES and GEDC and IUC community here that we are reaching out on a weekly basis per se. And I want to let you know, in terms of both IFES and GEDC, lots of people are beginning to come back. We are meeting next week in Minneapolis. We are meeting in Vienna. We are coming together in Cape Town and Mysore already next year. Sao Paulo, I'm working with the leadership of many friends in Brazil. So it's a whole different process where people, although online we communicate, but to really come together and build and continue to build not only the intellectual, but the personal relationships that are very, very, very important to us. And one of the key things I just wanted to share with you, the engagement of students, fundamental in all the different programs that we are putting together. Just a couple of final comments. I'm very excited that our book series of Rising to the Top, where many women engineering leaders contributed. We are working on our books now of the MENA Arab world and working with some thoughtful women leaders in that part of the world, and also with Southeast Asia. And we are offering webinars between now and Cape Town, bringing these women leaders together by webinars, and hopefully also physically when we meet each other in Cape Town. And then finally, and certainly not least important, and I'm building on this dialogue, we are thinking also of working with our close friends in China at Sashtec University in Shenzhen to have our GEDC Industry Forum next year. Let's hope we can do that, meet in China, and many of those issues that our two very thoughtful speakers, Cynthia and Michael, touched today are obviously highly, highly relevant. I thank all of you. Stay healthy, and peace be with all of you in our difficult global reality that we live in. Peace be with you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks,
Thanks so
Cynthia.
much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.